Okay, well, welcome everyone to this chat. The nerdcast, no, nerd larpers.
Yeah, there's gonna be. I have a couple of nerd takes that they're not gonna land favorably to certain people. Certain people that we'll be addressing today. Actually, I mean not directly. We're not calling anybody out, but.
And this all stemmed from a comment that you read on the Distributists video about the IRL event, correct?
Yeah, and it's really funny. I guess it's just human nature. You know, most of the comments were positive, but we want to pick the two that were negative to to draw all our attention to.
So I have the first one queued up. Can I read it?
Well, I also want to kind of set it up as so AA's event, the Scyldings event in Tennessee, is coming up in about 10 days. And I guess, once again, just like everything else that's organized on the internet, there is a barrage of critique and a barrage of, I don't know, skepticism. And then it's once again, we're on the dissident right. We can't just have nice things. Someone's got to come and create this rift. That's really what I want to address today. And for the people who are in favor of these kinds of events, real life meetups and get-togethers between people in the community, what is our end goal? What are we trying to achieve? Why we see this as a good thing? And then we'll address the critiques as well.
Yeah, so can I read this comment?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a comment from Catholic Warrior on Distributists video. So I was reviewing the last 4 years of YouTube analytics for the Distributist et al., and what's abundantly clear is that all these channels are dead. Sure, Dave, like most of his contemporaries, have a few thousand subs, but that number hasn't grown at all. I believe most of us continue to sub just out of habit, but Dave hasn't said anything interesting in at least 2 years. It's kind of cute listening to everyone on these channels LARP about how they would restructure society and move culture in one way or another, but let's be real. You're all just spectators. Monday morning quarterbacks. Heck, Nick Fuentes has done more to influence politics than all of the dissident right YouTube channel community combined. Maybe it's time to stop self-fart sniffing while milking super chats and Patreon bucks and actually make a difference in our culture.
Yeah, and I think this comment really represents a pervasive attitude among us. And nerd take number one, which is something that I wrote on Discord as well, is that I don't really want to do the deep dive into Pareto or Burnham's Machiavellians in general, but Pareto does write about this, where there's kind of this eternal tension between nerd types, class 1 academic types who like to delve into theory, and then class 2 types who are kind of more warrior spirit, more let's defend our blood and soil and defend what our ancestors passed down to us by force.
Yeah, it's the high tower versus the low street.
Yeah.
Both, I think, are necessary.
Yeah, exactly. The Pareto does say that the best, group is the union between the two when they work in harmony. But anyway, that's enough of the book stuff.
Well, I just want to first of all point out that this is a criticism without prescription in and of itself, because he does say actually make a difference in our culture. Mm-hmm. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. And there are people from the low street who also sort of say we need to make a difference. We need to get moving. But it really never goes beyond, well, call your senator, call your local representative, and make sure you got the emails going. And if that's all we have,
I think most of the time it doesn't even get to there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So,
well, maybe one of the implications he's suggesting is that at least Groyping got somewhere, which I'm not, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, you're not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, I have some ideas, but that's why we need to have this conversation, but we need to have it be more productive. And we need to sort of let go of shitting on the high tower or the low street and really grow a thicker skin. Because we're seeing at the time of this talking, I don't know if we want to include this, last night, Don the Pleb, a low streeter, was kicked out of the event. He was informed that he would no longer be speaking at the event and that the AA movement would be cutting ties with him officially.
Yeah.
So there's obviously stuff going on behind the scenes that is not conducive to a productive conversation.
Yeah, and once again, Don the pleb, academic.
Yeah.
High street, low street again.
We've got patricians and plebs fighting again, as they have done for 2,500 years.
Yeah.
So this goes to your, and I'd like you to speak on this. What is our goal?
Right. This goes to something that me and Bucklander discussed recently as well, which is, you could kind of say, the Christian road to power in some sense, which is in opposition to the Nietzschean road to power. So in the Nietzschean view, it's kind of like we got to impose. It's dominate or be dominated. So we have to impose our master morality. We can't let the slave morality cuck us, so to speak. But I think that that's not the only way to power. That's a very obvious, explicit way to power. But Christianity didn't necessarily use that to win the culture, let's say. Christianity's road to power is kind of more smaller scale, at least in the beginning, before Constantine. It's kind of this show that we have this deep bond between us, this love, right? And it doesn't matter how much you persecute us, we're not going anywhere. In fact, your persecution is making our faith stronger.
Yeah, and I see a lot of pushback on that. And there is not a lot of love for your fellow man in the dissident right.
Yeah.
It's largely criticism.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying, I'm kind of suggesting is that Christianity wasn't this revolution where they stormed the Capitol. Instead, Christianity was an attitudinal change among Christians. And that attitudinal change ultimately created what was a political change. And it didn't require any storming of the castle. It didn't require, ultimately, it didn't even require a hatred of the enemy. It required a sense of seeing us in the enemy and loving them as we would love one another.
Yeah, it was a product of the living in the Spirit, the fruits of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. One of the conclusions I kind of draw from this is that love itself is a road to power. When you become somebody who's involved, who builds good relationships, first of all, and then who demonstrates that virtue, you're going to change your immediate surroundings. It's the people around you are going to pick up on that, and you're going to become more influential just through that. So there's a place for revolution, perhaps. Well, that's debatable, but there's a place for that kind of large movement, like the trucker convoy, for example. There might be a place for that, for these big sweeping moves. But it's very easy, especially in internet circles, to forget that there is actually a place for how you approach day-to-day life and the people in your immediate surroundings.
And you would say that begins with love and is carried through by the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah. And I would also say that ultimately, when we're approaching something like a real life meetup, so this commenter says, oh, you guys are LARPing and you're not making a difference in our culture. Well, Catholic warrior, I very much beg to differ.
Well, because it's not nothing, number one. And number two, it's not YouTube videos. So he says that these groups aren't growing online, these YouTube channels aren't growing, according to Social Blade. But Social Blade can't track human beings going to an event and interacting with each other. Hopefully with some love.
Yeah.
And joy.
Fellowship. Fellowship is a word that...
Iron sharpens iron. Join the Iron Age Discord. Yeah. Links in the description.
Yeah.
You can't measure that on Social Blades.
Yeah, a lot of us are on these Discord communities. There's also a quality aspect rather than a quantity aspect as well, which Social Blade doesn't track. And so, once again, it's like, what are we trying to get out of these things? What are our goals? Why are we not griping Charlie Kirk? Part of that is also quality over quantity.
Yeah, and I just don't see... I see a value in criticism and love, but there is a hatred. that grows. Like there's a vitriol. Hatred might be too big a word, but there's a vitriol, as we see in this dust up between Don the Pleb and AA's group.
Yeah. And in the case of the Groypers, that vitriol also ultimately stems from their vitriol towards another certain group.
Yeah, there's not a lot of praying for people, praying for your enemy.
And I will say that this is not an easy thing. It's easy for us to know that this is what Jesus has taught us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an easy thing for us. I mean, I got into an argument on Facebook about 3 weeks ago with someone who I've been friends with for 5 or 6 years. And I certainly didn't feel any love when I was calling them some very unfavorable things. It's not an easy thing, but we acknowledge that this is something that we have to be more attentive to. Whereas what we've been seeing for the last 5 or 6 years is we have to destroy these people.
Right. And we have to abandon our morality and our traditions and pick up the mantle of power by any means necessary.
And then there's this attitude, we take power first, then we talk about morals. And nerd take number 2, take power first, is something that's come up in the Pareto chapter of the Machiavellians as well, where men have been talking about taking power first for 2,500 years, and maybe even more than that. And here's the second thing that I will say to Low Street. It's that there's a place for talking about taking power, but that can also itself spiral into something unhealthy. And I kind of see the parallel between that and talking about which celebrity we want to have relations with. You know, there's a place where that is like, okay, that's just in good fun. It's not entirely harmless either. But okay, I can grant that, okay, that's in good fun. That's just us boys having a chat. But well, it's a fantasy. It's indulging in fantasy. And there'll come a point where you overindulge in this fantasy of these women that we see on these different screens. And we obsess over that vision presented to us. We kind of turn away from what's immediately before us.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking about Shu. What were you saying? No, it's kind of a form of mental masturbation.
Yeah. And to tie it back immediately to the political sphere, it's the same thing where, we have to do a truckers rally. We have to storm the Capitol. We have to send a message to the elites via these mass movements. And only if we do that hard enough can we achieve what we want. And it's this overlooking again of what's immediately before us.
Which is your community and your spiritual walk with God.
Yeah. And the fellowship.
Yeah. I would include that in the spiritual walk, but you're absolutely right. And the demonstrations, the protests, storming the Capitol is what the cathedral wants you to do. They want you to play the dragon, going back to Curtis Yarvin, full circle.
Yeah.
They want you to play the dragon, and a lot of this Low Street tactics are playing the dragon. But a lot of these high tower thought exercises don't lead anywhere.
Sure, I think that's a fair criticism. And one of the things that I'm trying to change attitudinally in myself is also that I will admit, I can recognize that reading a lot of these academic books, political theory books, is itself a form of mental masturbation, in the sense that we talked about this in one of our episodes of Cannon Fodder as well, where it's very easy to be armchair, the Monday morning quarterback. And that's what pretty much all of us are doing, because we actually don't know what goes on behind the scenes at the very highest levels. We don't know what it's like to be Vladimir Putin, or Xi Jinping, or Joe Biden, or Klaus Schwab, or Bill Gates. We have no idea, because that world is very much not accessible to us. So we can sit here and pontificate, if I was in power, X, Y, and Z would be the final solution. No, the correct solution. But really, we are armchair quarterbacking. And there is a place for that stuff, because that's what sports fans do too, right? Football fans say, I would trade player X for player Y. And it's a way of bringing people together and attending to something. But at the same time, we can't let this power fantasy get to our head, where it's like, one day I'm going to be the general manager or the head coach of the New England Patriots. And then you guys will see how many Super Bowls they'll win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for some people, that might be a possibility. Someone out there in our sphere might someday rise to political power. But for 99% of us, it's probably a no. And we have to kind of recognize that and say, okay, if I'm not going to be a member of the ruling class anywhere at any point in my life, then how should I approach life?
Yeah, I think it takes a special kind of visualization to accurately gauge the scope and scale of how a lot of this stuff pertains to your own life. It's easy to give in to delusions of grandeur, especially the more history you read, the more books you read. It does expand your imagination to a certain extent, and some of that's good, but a lot of that's bad too.
And that's kind of how I am trying to approach these things now, is the acknowledgement that there's a 99% chance that I will never come close to the levers of power. And after seeing it from that perspective, now what do you want out of life? I want something like what you're doing. I want to be your neighbor, Cinder.
Mm-hmm.
Where people are moving to your town and to just be at a real fellowship to kind of engage in actually building a community and actually living among peers who we can all sharpen one another. Iron sharpens iron.
Yeah, exactly. Join the Iron Age Archive Discord, everyone. Yeah, it's a type of power to rely on community and not have to rely on harebrained ideas, for lack of a better term, about what society should look like. I don't want to take it back to be the change you want to see, but...
Well, I will acknowledge that someone like Nick Fuentes does have a degree of power. That also is a type of power.
But if Nick Fuentes got the crown, is that a king you would serve? I am frightened by the prospect that he would be a ruler.
Actually, that's another issue that I see, is that, you know, when we engage in internet politics, or when we engage in anything, we are feeding a certain type of beast, whether it's good or not. You know, we're feeding something, we're feeding into something, and that feeding into something summons something. It manifests something in the real world. And so when we're feeding into groyper culture or meme culture or revolutionary politics, that eventually summons something. Maybe a new type of leader arises from that environment. And so I think we should be more careful about that kind of thing too. We should be more conscious of that. You know, by engaging in these activities, what kind of thing are we summoning?
Yeah, and just to tack something onto that, I don't see a lot of humility in a lot of these circles, which is something I would like to see. Yeah, there's just, I don't know, there's a lot of, going back to vitriol, I don't know, there's just a lot of poison. I don't want to call it toxic because that's a buzzword, but there is this know-it-all, poisonous, answer for everything, solution for nothing type of mindset that is dragging everybody down. And that's why I would 100% agree with you to start embracing love and the spiritual walk with God, because humility will be a product of that.
Mm-hmm. And it's also kind of like Christ said that my yoke is light. But right now, all of this stuff is weighing us down. I got to be the most based. I got to be the most knowledgeable. I got to be the most warrior spirit.
Yeah, fill in the blank. There's 100 counterfeits on the dissident right of yokes that you are meant to carry. But the lightest is the one that's hardest to pick up initially, because you sort of have to surrender not having a good day, or maybe not having a good 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, so in light of everything we discussed, what would be your advice to those attending the event?
Just waiting for her to get dressed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she seems fine now. Oh, no. Okay. Well, I'm not too worried about the people who are actually going to the event, because the sense that I get, and granted, I can't say this with any real certainty, but I get the sense that the people going to this event already get it. And there is this getting it part of it that you really got to get involved. You really got to get your hands dirty to really understand what's going on. Because there are guys that I talk to still who I think still don't kind of get it. They still think that there is a snobbishness about events, these kind of social gatherings, because they just want to come and shitpost and black pill people and talk about current events. To them, that is the extent of internet friendship. And we can explain to them, oh no, that there's actually more to internet friendship, potentially. We can talk about it all we want, but until you actually experience it, you probably don't get it. Whereas I think everybody who's going to the Scyldings events probably gets it. That this is a gathering of friends.
I sure hope so. I know I'm really excited for the elite delegation from the Iron Age archive to meet up and go.
Yeah.
I know that is what I'm most looking forward to.
How will the other attendees recognize our delegation? Which our delegation is how many? 7 people?
Yes. Having never seen us together, I don't necessarily know how they would recognize us, besides my estimation, based on a lot of our VC chats, that we will be having a lot of fun. There's plenty of stuff we want to talk about. There's plenty of ideas we have for projects that we're going to get to talk about in person. We're going to be able to sit down, pull out some paper, have a drink, have a chat about what these projects look like in the future. And that's very exciting to me.
And I think actually fun is actually another key word. We don't want to make one another miserable. That I don't think much good comes out of that. So if you find going on the internet makes you in some way a miserable person, you do have to address that at some point.
Oh yeah, and I would encourage everyone to address that ASAP, because there's this term, the garden of your heart, and if you let bitterness into the garden of your heart, it will grow. And as it grows, you begin to show signs of being a bitter person. And if you're passive in your life, in your thought life, in your spiritual walk, whatever else, you can wake up one day 10 years from now and find yourself insufferable to those around you. And I think a lot of people in our spheres have found themselves in that position. And I grieve for them in a certain extent, but at the same time, I don't want to be around any of them.
And I think many of us have been there at one point or another. And in a way, maybe even now that we're still recovering from that. So we're not saying that, oh, you guys keep your stuff over there, we don't want to deal with you. It's also that in some ways we're not all the way out of it either, but we're trying to kind of bring everybody's attention to these issues that we're all dealing with.
Yeah, and we're authentically trying to get out. And that comes with a level of humility and humbling yourself to realize I don't know necessarily how this happened to me or why, but I know that it's bad, and I know that I need something outside of myself to get me out of it. And for a lot of us, we've come to the realization that that's Jesus Christ. And if you don't like it, wait a while. You might. And if you don't like it, ask us about it. We'd love to tell you.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I didn't like it at first. But then I was like, these guys are talking about something that I hadn't previously thought about. They're presenting things in a new light. It's interesting. Now I want to hear more. So there's this attitudinal way, this shift that you can kind of approach it from. It's very easy to dismiss what Christians are saying and say, oh, you guys, you're in your slave morality, et cetera, et cetera. But if you kind of leave room to steelman it and say, well, what are these guys actually talking about? Then I think you're approaching it more honestly.
If you're a slave to Christ, you're free from the world.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
If you're not, then you're a slave to the world.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love it. Let me do one. Yeah. I'm going to do a tail slate intro. What do we want to call this? Do we know?
I don't know. Something like High Street versus Low Street.
There we go. Yeah. Hello, everyone. This is Cinder, and I'm here with Jeff for this episode of The High Tower versus the Low Street. This is just a conversation, period. I bailed out of that one too quick. Okay, we're good.
Here, and then there. You'll be our last one. Okay, so we'll start here.
Yeah, hello, I'm David, do work with the Iron Age Archive.